Welcome to part 4, estimated breeding values. In this part, I'll discuss the different breeding values that we have available to us and what they mean. First, we'll start with our terminal traits. So for weaning weights, the weaning weight estimated breeding value is provided to us in kilograms. So because these breeding values are calculated in Australia through the lamb plan system, our weight traits are provided to us in kilograms. These weaning weight EBVs are representative of weights collected between 45 and 90 days of age, with an average age, lamb age, or kid age being 60 days. It's important to weigh all lambs on the same scales so that we don't have any variation between scales, and weigh all lambs on the same day. So I encourage you to wean your lambs on the same day, weigh them on the same day, because otherwise we have variation in lambs maybe potentially just being heavier because they're older, not because they're more genetically superior. It's all about maintaining that contemporary group structure. By contemporary group, I mean a group of animals that are managed in the same environment, given the same opportunity to perform. We want to maintain that contemporary group so that we can accurately evaluate the genetic differences between individuals. So by weighing all the animals on the same day, they're exposed to the same environment, they're weighed on the same day, and then we can adjust for small differences in age with our statistical analysis. So just because a lamb is born 2 days earlier, it doesn't mean we need to wean them 2 days earlier. Wean them on the same day, and we can adjust for that extra 2 days of growth so that we can accurately compare individuals within that contemporary group. So the key is to weigh them on the same day on the same scales. Here, generally, we want to apply selection pressure in the positive direction. Generally, heavier weaning weights mean heavier or greater average daily gain pre-weaning. We have heavier animals that are available to market post-weaning. We also have post-weaning weights. Post-weaning weight, again, is given to us in kilograms. We have an early post-weaning time frame between 90 and 150 days of age with an average of 120 days of age. We have a late post-weaning time frame that's representative of any lamb or weight that's taken after 150 days of age. We need to make sure this post-weaning weight is taken at least 30 days after the weaning weight so that we have an accurate representation of that individual's growth potential independent of the mother, the female, what it can do on its own post-weaning. Again, weigh all the lambs on the same day on the same set of scales so we can maintain that contemporary group structure. And generally, selection pressure in the positive direction is desirable, as lambs will then be heavier, grow faster, can reach heavier market weights, or can reach the same market weight in fewer days. We also have EBVs for muscling, and our muscling EBV is eye muscle depth. So it's measuring the depth of that rib eye muscle, that longissimus dorsi muscle, the loin muscle, at the interface between the 12th and the 13th rib. So rather than taking area in beef cattle, we use a ribeye area as our muscling trait. In sheep and goats, we use depth. They've determined that depth can be determined more accurately than area. And still, they're highly correlated and related. And so we can utilize one to predict the other. So this is collected on live animals using carcass ultrasound. So in our breeding stock and those males or those females that we want to evaluate for those muscling traits, we can utilize carcass ultrasound to determine what that eye muscle depth is while they're still alive, identify those superior individuals, and then be able to make improvements in those carcass traits. Obviously, if we were to collect the carcass traits post-mortem and on the carcasses hanging in the cooler, identifying genetically elite individuals or individuals that have superior muscling traits doesn't do us a whole lot of good because their breeding value is nil at that point in their life. And so we need to be able to identify those muscling traits while the animal is still alive so that we can utilize those superior animals as breeding stock. These muscling traits are generally measured at the same time our post-weaning weights are measured, and selection pressure should be applied in the positive direction, making animals heavier muscled and more likely to bring premiums at markets. The trait that we utilize to measure fat is fat depth. This is also measured at that interface between the 12th and the 13th rib, and is measured again using carcass ultrasound. At the same time, our muscling traits are collected. So we do this all around that post-weaning time points. And here, selection pressure should be in the negative direction. We want to decrease fat. Less fat means a higher cutability carcass in an animal that is more sought after by the packer, the retailer, and the end consumer. Moving on to our maternal traits, we have number of lambs born. The number of lambs born, EBV, is expressed as a percentage, and it's derived from our lambing records. So we need to record lambing records on all of our ewes, as well as all of the lambs born. This is all going to go into that genetic evaluation to give us an accurate representation of the genetic merit those females have for number of lambs born, or the genetic potential that rams have to pass on to their daughters to increase number of lambs born. So it is expressed as a percentage. So I think this is best illustrated with an example. Ewes with a plus 10 number of lambs born would average 0.1 more lambs at each lambing event, or their daughters would be expected to have an additional 0.05 more lambs at each one of their lambing events. So over the course of 100 lambing events, we would expect to have 10 additional lambs born. While these numbers sound quite small individually, if we have 100 ewes, we go from 0 to plus 10, we get an additional 10 lambs, and that can be quite substantial. Number of lambs weaned, very similar to number of lambs born, also expressed as a percentage. It's going to be derived from our weaning records. We want to remove any lamb that's lost prior to weaning, and this includes bottle lambs. Bottle lambs were not raised by the ewe, and so that ewe should not get credit for raising that lamb. So either she didn't have enough milk production, she wasn't a good enough mother, whatever it might be, she was not able to successfully raise that lamb to weaning, so she should not get credit for raising that individual. This combines prolificacy as well as lamb survival and mothering ability to some extent. Individuals with greater number of lambs weaned are going to be individuals that are not only prolific, but also individuals that have a higher survivability and can make it to that weaning time point. Selection pressure here should be in the positive direction. Generally, we want more lambs weaned because, remember back to the previous parts of this section, we discussed the importance of prolificacy and the economic impact that prolificacy can have in our production systems. Milk is described with what we call maternal weaning weight, MWWT, and this is expressed in kilograms. The milk EBV is derived from weaning weight. Because these aren't dairy animals, so we're not milking them every day, we can't predict the actual level of milk production. Rather, from our weaning weight records, we can do some statistical analysis and determine what component of that weaning weight is the result of the individual lamb versus what's the result of what mom gave it through milk. The maternal weaning weight is our best indicator of milk production, and it is described, it's a weight metric in kilograms. It's predicted based on that difference between the expected weaning weight EBV and the actual lamb weaning weight EBV. If the difference isn't due to the lamb's own genetics, then mothering ability and additional milk production then contribute. This maternal weaning weight is a combination of milk production as well as some mothering ability attributes as well. Here, selection pressure should be applied in the positive direction in most cases, because increased milk production is going to support that increased prolificacy and making sure that we have enough milk available for those lambs to consume so that we can increase our overall weaning weights and the pounds of lamb marketed per ewe. Scrotal circumference is another maternal trait that can be measured. Scrotal circumference can be used or selected for to improve the breeding capacity of rams and the reproductive performance of ewes. Sexual maturity in the females occur at an earlier age. So rams with larger scrotal circumferences, generally their daughters will reach sexual maturity at a younger age. In addition, these daughters may have a slight increase in number of lambs born and number of lambs weaned. So we can use scrotal circumference as an indicator for not only the breeding capacity of the ram himself, but also the reproductive potential of his daughters. The scrotal circumference is measured at that post-weaning time point, or roughly 120 days of age. We also have EBVs for our wool trait. So if wool production is something of interest to you and your production system and your sheep, then selection for these wool traits may be beneficial. We have an EBV for fleece weight. That greasy fleece weight, it is expressed as a percentage. So that EBV is reported as a percentage of the mean fleece weight. We need to weigh all the fleeces on the same scale, similar to how we weigh all the lambs on the same scale at weaning. Record the number of days since the previous shearing, because the number of days there can obviously impact the weight of that fleece. We need to handle all those fleeces similarly. So if we're skirting those fleeces, we need to skirt all the fleeces. If we're not going to skirt the fleeces, then we don't skirt any of the fleeces. We need to manage them in the same way so that we can accurately assess those differences in greasy fleece weights. Generally here, we want a selection pressure in the positive direction. Increasing fleece weight is just an additional pounds of wool that we have available to market. Fiber diameter is another important trait. Fiber diameter is measured in microns, and it measures the fineness or the coarseness of that fleece. We need to obtain a sample from a similar area on each sheet, generally the front shoulder, and then we can utilize micron testing, this optical scanning, to determine the micron size, the fiber diameter from each one of those fleeces from each sheet. Here we want to apply selection pressure in the negative direction. We want smaller fiber diameters. Smaller fiber diameters is going to be smaller micron sizes and a finer fleece. Finer fleeces are more valuable. So negative direction, smaller fiber diameter is preferred. Next, we have staple length. Staple length is measured in millimeters, and it is simply the length of that individual wool fiber. So obtain a sample from all the fleeces in a similar area from each fleece. Here, we generally want to apply selection pressure in the positive direction. Depending on what, again, market reward, market discounts, generally fleeces that have a longer staple length are more valuable than those that have a shorter staple length. So we want to improve that staple length. That's an overview of traits related to terminal production, maternal production, as well as our wool traits. We touched on some of those fitness traits at fecal egg count EBV in the previous sections. And so that provides an overview of some of those EBVs that are available, the metrics that go into those EBVs, and what they really mean.